Welcome back to another episode of Fox West Texas Sports Unscripted. I'm your host, Casey Buscher, now joined by Fox Sports and Westwood One reporter, Laura Okmin. Laura, it's so good to see you.
It is so good to see you. It's always good to see your face, but now during these times, it's really, really good to see your face. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Well, over 2 decades of being in this industry, you are paving a road for so many women, from covering the NBA Finals to Super Bowls to the Olympics to NFL games on Sundays. You are just fantastic. But I think just starting from the beginning, how did you get your start in the sports industry?
The same way you did, the same way most young women and men do, paying my dues. And when I started, which was almost 30 years ago now, I was very much told at an early age, don't think about sports, because I did one sports class in college for my journalism major. I was the only woman, and I was like, this is fantastic. I love this. I'm a Chicago girl. I know sports. I love sports. I love these stories. I'd love to tell these stories. And I was very much told, listen, it's already hard enough to be a broadcaster, period, or a journalist, period. But if you put a woman and sports together, it's not really, you should have a plan B. And I didn't want to do that. So my first job I took was in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was doing news during the week and sports during the weekend, in a time where there were very few women doing sports. And I just started from there. I did that for a year, and then I went to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I was full sports for the first time, and then went to Chicago, and then CNN Sports and Fox Sports. And so it's really just been growing and building and moving on and moving in all these different directions.
And something that for women, or really anyone in the industry, it's hard to make it, right? It's hard to get that first step. And when you get that, it's even harder to stay there and to maintain, being relevant as a reporter for years to come. But you've been able to do that. You've very much established yourself with Fox Sports, now Westwood One, and you've made it and you've stayed there. How has that process been for you to stay there and to stay in the shoes that you're in?
I love that you asked that, because we always talk about wanting to have more and more women as role models for all you young women coming into this business. But for so long, I was so insecure about my age, because I was always told, once you hit 30, a woman aging on camera, just be aware of what's coming, that you're going to feel a lot of, you're not going to feel as wanted. And then suddenly I was 30, and suddenly I was 35. And then it was, 40, like 40 is your cutoff. And so I've always been so scared of those milestones. And so I'm really thankful at this age for all of you young women, not to just see women, but my hope is that you're going to see more and more of me. You're going to see more and more of older women who have built and sustained long-term careers in this business. I don't want you guys just to look at all the young women who look like you guys, who are doing sidelines and who are in their 20s, who have sweet gigs. I want you guys and men, all young women and men, to look at the journalists who really sustained long careers. And I'm really, really proud of that. I know, again, for so long being so insecure about it and being so nervous about getting older. One day I was doing a game a couple of years ago, and my phone, it was like Sunday morning, and I was getting ready for the game, and my phone started blowing up, which is rare on a Sunday morning. Like, my friends and family know to kind of, I'm getting ready for an NFL game. And all of a sudden, I was notified about a congratulations, Laura Okmin is the 3rd longest tenured sideline reporter in NFL history. And I didn't know anyone kept track of that. In my mind, I would have never even thought about how long have I been doing this and where does that measure up. But it made me so proud, because all the years that I looked around and looked at what other people were doing and other paths everybody was on, and why didn't I get this job, or why did he or she get that job? It was really nice to all of a sudden stop and take a breath and be like, I can't believe how long I've been doing this. I can't believe how long I've been able to do what I love. And so I'm really, really grateful for the longevity and to be able to sustain it. And more importantly, for you all to be able to look at the men and women who do it for a long period of time, but especially women, because we're used to seeing men age on camera. We haven't been used to seeing women age.
Exactly. And you've talked to us so much about having that shelf life and what you thought, okay, I reached this age and maybe I won't be able to do what I do anymore. What has been the most difficult part about that, just along in your career? What's been the hardest part?
I think probably for so long you hear everybody else's voice. Everybody else's voice is telling you at first, you're kind of hit with the sexism. At first it's, what do you know about sports? You don't belong here. And why are you talking sports? And then all of a sudden when you realize you beat that, hey, I've been talking sports for a long time. I'm good. I finally made it. And suddenly you're smacked in the face with ageism and going, okay, well, you've done it, but now you better think of something else to do because you can't do it for a long time. And so I think I heard that for so long. And what happens is all those voices become yours. And so until I did the work on myself, I didn't know anymore if that was other people in my head or was that my voice in my head. And I just needed to figure out what my voice was and how I felt about who I am and what I do and how am I growing and how am I getting better. And I had to really, really work on making sure that my voice was really positive and was really encouraging versus for all those years hearing just so much negativity. And I didn't grow up in the social media age. So that's what always worries me for all of you, which is you've got extra voices. You've got now thousands of voices and sometimes really mean, cruel voices. And so I think that was the hardest thing for me to go through. And I know for many of you, which is just how do I make sure that all that junk and all that noise doesn't become my voice that I'm talking to myself with.
And can you think of any stories maybe in the past from players, coaches, or just any examples of maybe people looking down on you for being a woman, or they just think that you don't know anything? And I want to bring up this. I was going through some of your old videos and interviews, and in 2003, I believe it was, you interviewed Cam Newton, and he kind of has the reputation of, the one time he was in a press conference and he mentioned when a girl asked a question, he's like, oh, what do you know? It's funny hearing a woman talk about routes, but I saw the sit down interview you did with him. And I feel like I learned so much more about him and who he is as a person because he respected you so much in that chair. It was a normal conversation. It didn't matter that you were a woman. He could talk about the X's and O's, but he could also talk about who he was becoming as a man, which I thought was very interesting because I've always had like this thought about Cam Newton since, that stuff came out about him. But so can you just think of any instances where you've kind of felt?
So many.
Yeah.
How long do we have?
I know.
But I can tell you the first one. I can tell you the first one that has always that changed the course of my career for a really long time because it was the first voice that got into my head that was louder than mine, which was when I was ready to do my first live shot, and it was Friday Night Football, and so it was a huge deal, and it's in the South. And again, as a Chicago girl, I don't even think I realized the magnitude. And I just remember standing there and I was waiting for one of the high school coaches to come out, the head coach, to do a pregame interview. And I was so excited, like I'd made it. And all this time being told, you'll never make it and you can't do this. And I remember just standing there having a moment of like how proud I was of myself and of how excited I was. And now I was actually a paid journalist. I was making $10,500 a year. So I was good. Mm-hmm. And the head coach was coming out and I had a huge smile on my face, like having this just great moment. And he was carrying a football and a basketball and he had some people around him like laughing, and he came out and I was about to shake his hand, but was like, this is weird. What am I doing? What's he doing? And he said, little girl, I just wanted to make sure that you knew the difference between a football and a basketball. Football is, it was a basketball is round and a football is oblong. And everybody laughed. And that changed me like that, because all of a sudden I went from being on top of the world to just shrinking and wanting to cry and being like, oh, like I thought I made it, but I'm not even close. All of a sudden I saw what I was up against. And so that really changed me, where all of a sudden, instead of feeling like I had confidence and I was comfortable, I made sure that everything I said, you knew I knew what I was talking about. So suddenly, instead of asking short to the point questions and wanting to know your answer, my questions were 15, 20, 30, 40 seconds, because I couldn't just ask you about how do you feel about the transition in your defense. I would have to say to you, you've transitioned from a 3-4 to a 4-3, and let me tell you what a 3-4 is and a 4-3 is. And the player would just be sitting there like, what am I even here for? But I was so desperate to prove myself. And that lasted for a really long time. And I know a lot of women go through that, which is just everything you say, every interview you do, you always have this need to prove yourself. And I think that was one of the biggest things. And I could give you just, a million examples of that, but of trying to make sure that I fit in and everyone knew I knew what I was talking about. But really quickly about Cam, I'm glad you brought that up, because I have very rarely faced that kind of sexism from players. Players don't care about what your gender is. They just care that you know what you're talking about, you've done your research, and that you truly are listening to them. And that's it. So I was so disappointed when Cam said that, because I always had a great relationship with Cam, and I worked hard to earn that relationship with Cam. And I never felt my gender played any role in that. So I would tell you the sexism that I felt mostly in this business is from the business. It's from the industry. But once you are in getting to know players, coaches, once they know you know what you're talking about and you have a great work ethic and you do your preparation, they trust you, and that's man or woman.
That's great to hear. And for me, I can turn on ESPN, Fox, whatever it is, and I feel like I normally can see a woman in the host chair, sideline. There's people like Mina Kimes who play a lot of different roles now, analysts, play-by-play, whatever it is. So for you, breaking down those doors, you spoke about people didn't even think you had a chance to make it, and you did. You broke down those doors, and you're still there, and you're still standing there. Were there any women that you did look up to when you were on the come up, and you're like, okay, I see a couple women who I can maybe emulate one day, and I can do this too? How did you kind of keep that confidence up and think, okay, well, it's not just a man's world, I can also make it too?
There were so few. Like there were a few when I was coming up, but there weren't a lot of them. And what I would say is this: I really I remember two things that changed my life with how I looked at myself and how I looked at other women in this business. First of all, I had a mentor who hired me at CNN Sports, and I remember at that time there was a big stable of anchors. It was a 24-hour network, CNN Sports Illustrated, and at that time competing with ESPN, and a big network of a big stable of anchors and reporters. And I, at the time, was a reporter for a year, and then I was a host and anchor for a long time. And I asked him a question, and I compared myself to the other two women. And he said, "That's interesting. Why do you compare yourself to them?" And I was like, "Oh, because we're the three women." And he goes, "That's funny." He goes, "Because you're nothing like them. I would have compared you to," and he named two of the men who I was like, "Oh, that's so true. That's definitely those three, like those two and me, we are much more similar than I was with the other two women." Mm-hmm. And he said to me, "Don't look at other women, look at other journalists, look at other storytellers, look at other people who you really admire." So that was very important to me. So I didn't just look at women. And I will say also, you know this, but my best friend for over 20 years was Stuart Scott. And when Stuart and I first met, we were both coming up. It was before Stuart really had his star explode. And Stuart used to crush me on that. He would always say to me, "Stop saying you're a woman sports broadcaster. Stop saying you're a female journalist. Like, you're a sports broadcaster. You're a journalist, and it has nothing to do with your gender." And so I think that was beaten into me for a long time until I understood it. But that's the same thing I always want to teach all you young women too, which is don't just look at other women and what they're doing. Look at yourself, and look at all storytellers, period, and how they're building their career, how they're building their relationships and sustaining it. And is that something that you want to emulate?
And so, speaking of relationships, basically the entire Galvanized camp, the one that I got to go to a year ago, it was all about relationships. And you talked to us a lot about that's what matters, and that's how you make it in this business, and that's the way you last in this business, is by making good relationships and with players and coaches and everything, and people and your colleagues. For you, how important are relationships in your job?
My lifeline. Like, that's everything. That's my foundation. Everything's building relationships. And I just remember for years, people, my bosses would say to me and question some of my relationships in terms of why, if you're close with this person, why aren't you doing these interviews with them? Why aren't you sitting down with them? And I was always very careful of why I was building relationships, and there wasn't an agenda attached to it. And I had to really prove that to myself. Just because I'm building a relationship with you doesn't mean I want something from you. And that's not easy as a reporter, because that's kind of our nature is, can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? And so it's been everything in terms of my heart and the relationships I have with all these men and women I've covered. But now it's so important, because as I'm in my second chapter, still doing the announcing, but also I have a company for women. And so when you say the Giants boot camp, I didn't just call the Giants, a week before and go, can I bring 25 amazing women in your building? Yeah. That's every time I bring a group of women into an NFL team or an MLB team or USA hockey team, any of these partnerships, it's because they've known me for a really long time. And they know who I am because I haven't just been asking them for things. So that's been instrumental in my growth. So I can take all of you into NFL buildings and hopefully get you guys hired and let you peek behind the curtain in a much more comfortable way than I did, and instead of getting thrown in there. And also now I have clients who are NFL head coaches, and I do a lot with messaging, and I'm a communications coach. And so that also hopefully says that I've worked with these men and have known these men for decades. And now they're hiring me as an expert in how to manage their messaging and their communication. And so I hope that shows all of you that I didn't build this just for being a reporter. I built this for my life. And now I'm friends with the wives and the kids and the husbands and and the partners. And all of that has been really, really meaningful to me.
So you build Galvanize, and was this kind of something that people that know your story, they understand why you built Galvanize, and it's so much more than just, like you mentioned, just going into an NFL team and interviewing, at first, maybe for some girls, they go and they're like, oh, this is cool, I'm interviewing an NFL player, but it's so much more than that. And these women are people that you talk to throughout the year, not just women who are coming for 2 days and things like that. What did make you want to start Galvanize, and how did it happen?
I wanted to give you all something I didn't have. I never had a network of women. I never had a sisterhood, and not because of the stereotypes of women are catty and women are awful in this business, because it wasn't that. It was just I was so focused on my own path, like most of you are, and all my peers were. It's just we were so focused on this, just I got to make it. I wasn't looking ahead to see who else made it before me, who could help. I wasn't looking to the right or to the left of me to go, how are you, or looking behind to see who I was in front of. I just was focused on my own growth and my own direction. And eventually what happened to me, at least, was you are moving in that direction and you're where you wanted to be or where you hope to be, but suddenly you also look around and you realize how lonely you are. And I didn't have any women. I had Stuart, who was my rock, but Stuart couldn't understand a lot of the things that I was going through, and I couldn't understand a lot of things he was going through. But I really, really was like, God, it would have been really nice to have women who were doing this so we could really lean on each other. And honestly, what really changed it was I started hearing from head coaches who would pull me aside and say things to me about young women who were covering them, and saying and the coaches would say, I wanted to help her, but she'd ask a question. I didn't know what she meant. So I would try to answer and give her something and she didn't know what I meant. And that really scarred me because I started seeing all these young women getting thrown in, I thought way too early. And I wouldn't have known what I was doing if I was covering the NFL at 20. I needed to grow into it. But I started seeing what was happening, that all these companies wanted to hire more and more women, which was great, but they just were doing it so soon. Mm-hmm. And so I can't change the business, but I thought, well, at least what I can do is when they're getting these opportunities a little earlier than I wish they would, at least I can hopefully help them so they're prepared for it. So, at a boot camp, it's so little.